Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon and welcome to the Lighthouse session on the consultants Cometh. It's interesting actually, we just had a mention of the elephant room because in many ways this subject is all about the elephant in the room. So for those of you that don't know me, prior to joining the Lighthouse company, I worked for creative agencies and media agencies for 30 years. So this is a subject very close to my own heart. And probably for those of you that have been to a number of sessions in Adweek, would have touched some of the extraordinary changes that are going on right now in the agency landscape. Whether that's false impressions or issues over transparency, unsafe environments. There is, if you like, a perfect storm on one hand, and then, of course, you've got the extraordinarily powerful tech companies and the platforms and the impact that's having on the agency world. So in many ways, for consultants to come in now into the marketing space is the very last thing that agencies need. Hence this session. And actually, I think a lot of it was well summed up by an ex-client of mine called Benjamin Braun. He's actually come from Audi, and his quote last week in campaign was, "When the management consultancies come knocking, it's not the marketing director who opens the door, it's the MD or the FD that has their ear." So what we're aiming to find out today is whether they're looking to eat the breakfast, the lunch or the dinner from the agency groups, or whether in fact it's all three. So we have a superb panel today that I'd like to introduce. Firstly, I'm going to start over on the left. We have Russell Marsh, who's the Managing Director of Accenture Digital. He moved into the consultancy side about 18 months ago after spending 23 years on the agency side. Then we have Debbie Vavingas, who is IBM iX leader for the UK and Ireland. Debbie's been recognised recently in the Beamer 100 as an agent of change and also the Every Woman Leader of the Year. Next to her is Colin Light, who's partner and digital services leader at PwC, where he's been for the last 14 years in very senior roles, both in the UK and in Europe, and actually also in Asia. And then closest to me is John Wilkins, the executive chairman of Karmarama, the business, of course, that was acquired by Accenture a little over a year ago. Prior to that, John worked for BNP, PhD, and was one of the three founding partners of the comms agency Naked. So thank you all, firstly, so much for agreeing to join me. So, I'm actually going to start by asking them to reveal a little bit of the mystique that goes on within these organisations, and I'm going to ask them just to spend a minute to 2 minutes each on the resources and the scale and the capacity and capabilities within your organisations. I'll start with you, Russell.
Sure. So Accenture is about 430,000 people, I think, now in 120 different countries, 200 offices globally. Made up of a core practice, which was Accenture, which has been around for a while. But then on top of that, building out a whole bunch of additional businesses like Fjord, Karmarama, Maglan, a whole range of other service propositions that are then bolted onto the side. And the reason that's happened is to allow Accenture to offer not only just the management consulting and the technology pieces, but how do you ultimately drive value across the whole business? How do you engage in that user experience piece from the business objectives at the start all the way through to the execution of the creative at the end?
Great, thank you. Debbie.
Sure. So obviously IBM is similarly sized, 400,000 so in total. IBM iX is about 15,000 people now around the world, run out of 30 plus studios, and in the UK we're kind of 500 strong from a kind of standing start. So from IBM iX, our role here is to work with big clients to try and the reason IBM exists is to try and drive and achieve those experiences as industries and companies change and the boundaries change. Then they've got some big challenges to face, and experience is still super important. So we're here to help make it happen.
Thank you. Colin.
Yeah, I mean, PwC is a little bit of a different beast because we're a partnership, which is a series of national partnerships, and we come together globally. We're in our consulting, our advisory business, we're about a $5 billion business. The experience centres, so that's the home of our creative talent. We have about 35 of those spread around the world that grow around 3 or 5 a year, depending on where we go. What we don't do is we don't carve out that part of our business. So what we do is say, actually, if digital is everything, which we believe it is for all of our clients, then how do you make sure all of our consulting business, all of our tax and cybersecurity business and all of that stuff goes on the same journey? So it's hard for us to say this is the bit over here. Mm-hmm. As far as the creative talent goes, that sits in the experience centres, and there's a few thousand of those, about 3,000 people who are just pure creative and UX in that. But it's more about how we change the rest of the business.
Right.
And I'm John Karmarama, 300 of us, based in Farringdon. Not got much to add to this. I mean, we're part of Accenture Interactive that are big. They're the most agency-like object within Accenture. There's about 7,000 of them around the world. And that's me.
Great. Okay. Well, I'm going to get straight to the elephant in the room. It's the question that I want to know most, which is about whether you see yourselves in competition with or in collusion with the agency networks. Start with you again, Russell.
I think that do we compete? Yes, but we compete on certain objects. But also, we're a very different organisation. We compete with lots of different organisations. So we compete sometimes with IBM, we compete sometimes with PwC, we compete sometimes with WPP. It's everything from technology, infrastructure, implementation, which creative agencies typically don't do, all the way then through to user experience, analytics, and then to the front end where actually we're looking at things like media, all the way then through to creative execution through people like John. So we compete on little bits, but the whole thing, it's just a very different industry from what I've discovered myself, having worked in creative industries and then moved it over. It's just a very different organisation. So to answer the question, we compete on some things, absolutely, but it's a very small part of a bigger transformation thing that we're typically trying to do for clients.
Right. Debbie?
I warned you I was going to say this, right? So both and neither, right? Similarly, the challenges that the clients we work with face are huge, right? Nobody's staying in their box. The boundaries between industries are completely collapsing. And you know, what does the future mean for a lot of these companies is utterly unknown, right? And they can think about some of the things that are going to happen, but nobody's got a magic 8 ball, not really, and nobody really knows what's coming. And those challenges are massive and are typically of a global nature. And so from an IBM X perspective, those are the transformations we're really, coming together to help our clients achieve. So there is some competition, but so it's both and neither.
Okay. Perhaps I should slightly reframe the question, which is, would you see yourselves pitching against an agency? Colin, have you found yourself in that situation?
No. Well, on one or two occasions where the agency was somewhat overstretching themselves. But I'm just saying, the reality is that we rarely ever pitch for the same pieces of work. So we formed alliances. In fact, we have a very strong alliance with WPP in the US, particularly with Y&R, Ogilvy and JWT. We're extending that alliance around the rest of the world. It's not exclusive to WPP. We're really clear. So we have a purpose, and it sounds trite, but PwC's purpose is building trust in society, solving important problems. The reason I say it sounds trite is most people roll their eyes, but actually it's over 170-year business. It's pervasive in everything we do, which means nowadays we're in the business of transformation. So we are, almost everything we do is about how you move a business in a transformational way. When you get into execution, we're really clear now on where are the bits where we need to be strategic and we need a role, and where are the bits when we're getting into more and more that overlap between strategy and execution, where we're not going to be the best people in the room to do that. And that's what the partnerships with the agencies for us are for. We have brand strategists, we have marketing strategists, but mainly I'm not going to compete with Saatchi, mainly so that we talk the same language, so that when we're on that transformational journey, those teams act as a proper team under the guise of what we're transforming to, not because it's them versus us.
Okay. Perhaps, John, I'd like to get your perspective on something that Colin touched on, which is agencies starting to move into new territories. Yeah. And if you look at Publicis' acquisition of Sapient, 3.7 billion.
Was that the write down, or was that just checking?
It's dead.
Sorry.
So clearly there is a play going the other way as well, and competition works in both ways. have you got a perspective on whether more traditional advertising agencies are going to start to acquire different types of businesses to compete?
Yeah, I mean, almost definitely, yeah. I mean, the Sapient thing is obviously the biggest one. I think they're definitely, all the agencies are trying to bring consultancy type people into their businesses. I think like the only thing I'd add to the broader debate we just had is, what we're all trying to do is help our clients grow in difficult times. And what agencies are really, really good at, which should not be underestimated, is we understand how to change behaviour through communication. And with the greatest respect to consultancies, they don't. So one of the, they understand the mechanics of growth, but they don't understand the language of growth. So I think agencies are trying to understand how businesses grow practically, what are the levers of growth, and to do that they will bring in growth strategy people from consultancy backgrounds. And I think consultancies have recognised that you can do a lot of back office stuff, you can improve automation, you can do lots of stuff that can increase profitability, but driving top line growth is a customer issue. Who understands customers? People who've worked in marketing. Who helps marketers? People who work in agencies. So, it's a sort of roundabout way of answering your question. I do think there is whether it's through partnership or ownership or hiring or the Sapient type thing, I think there is a model where if we're all trying to help clients through difficult times, we're all trying to help them grow. Every single person in this room is either in that situation or in that support structure, then, agencies are really well poised, I think, to contribute to that, but maybe not on their own. Right. So they're going to do things to get there.
Great. Debbie, I'm going to ask you that question as well. Is there anyone that you fear out there from an agency network perspective?
To be honest, I don't spend my time worrying about what others are doing. We focus very much on what's the right thing for our clients in terms of, to the point that was just made. How do we help them grow? How do we bring together the right people at the right time to help them face the challenges and help them, potentially understand, to kind of add to what was being said, yes, agencies understand customers and how to influence behavior, but so does driving insight out of data, right? And we've got a lot of that capability, and we can really use that to try to drive out those trends and understand what that tells us. And that for me is sort of the power of the consultancy rather than the agency.
Right. Russell, you're probably best placed to talk about the comparison, having worked agency side and now consultancy side, about how well equipped these organisations are to dealing with the client's issues. Have you got a perspective on the last 18 months?
Yeah, I think the difference, excuse me, is that the management consultants, I can only speak for Accenture, is focused very much on the business side, so the transformation. How do you change the whole business? So how do you add value to the whole organisation by removing cost and using that cost that you've taken out to then put back into somewhere else to add value? So that ties then a lot into the sort of back-end big infrastructure pieces. So you're able to then build out, as you build up then, ultimately that you're then looking at how you can tie that then into the communications piece that John talked about. Because just changing the infrastructure and changing the technology without changing the behaviour, both in the organisation and ultimately the consumer, adds zero value. So the pieces have to come together. And again, that's ultimately where Accenture is trying to get to. The creative component is, as I said before, it's a small component ultimately of the bigger piece. But just like we talked about all of our clients going through transformation, exactly the same is taking place within the creative industry. They need to reinvent themselves. They need to work out how they take costs out of the business, automate through things like programmatic where it's relevant, and then add incremental value by reinventing themselves to add new creative opportunities to bring to life some of the client problems. It's a universal problem at the moment.
Mm-hmm. I'm going to touch on something which came up a couple of weeks ago from Mark Pritchard from P&G. He talked to the audience about potentially taking more marketing services in-house, and it seems to be a growing conversation from clients now. Colin, I'll start with you about how many clients are you engaging with now about helping them to insource those marketing services?
I mean, it's interesting. John and I were just talking. I mean, one thing is clear. We all compete for talent, and I don't think we should be afraid about that. But when it comes to competing with talent, actually, one of the things that we were just talking about is even the professional services industry suffers relatively high levels of attrition at the kind of 3-4 year into their career. And for the first time ever, the majority of those people are going into industry. And industry is paying very large sums of money, perhaps more than the value of those people and their experience, but perhaps not. And it's because they're building internal capabilities. I think the professional services market has never been more competitive than it is right now. And it's because clients have got much, much more sophisticated. And that's across everything, but just as true within marketing.
Yeah, I mean, I think they will. Sorry, I think, I'm not saying it because I don't know Mark Pritchell at all, but I think they will definitely bring more services in-house. I mean, content management, nearly every client I know has now got some sort of production capability in-house because they're having to produce too much content too quickly and it's not cost effective for them to outsource that. The serving systems, whether it be for CRM or managing their own data, we could touch more on that in a minute. Obviously, a lot of clients are concerned about the manipulation of their data, so there's definitely a sentiment to bring a data strategy, obviously with partners like consultants, but to bring that well and truly back in-house and to round that out as a service. I think, certainly starting to see some clients looking at adding onto their technology play programmatic. They obviously have these relationships with the big platforms. To be frank, they can't really understand the value add between the dollars they spend. I'm just telling you what clients say to me. This isn't my point of view, but between the dollars they spend with an agency and the outcomes, they might as well just spend that directly with the platform. So I think, we'll start to see a lot of in-housing. I mean, what you don't want is you don't want too many Kendall Jenner sort of crappy TV ads made by clients, and I'm not saying that because we make TV ads, but there are certain creative limitations, I think, where actually if you're your own doctor, you convince yourself you're doing the right thing, and creative agencies are fantastic protagonists to push ideas into places that clients wouldn't think of it. So I think if clients replace their ad agency, I'm not saying that because I work for one, then I think they're really stupid, because I think that high premium creativity is something that is well worth outsourcing.
Thank you. Debbie, you've been asked by clients to help them to take their services in-house?
For sure, but it isn't just those direct skills. For a lot of the conversations I'm having about how do the clients enable themselves to be flexible and agile, and so it's those kind of ways of behaviour skills that they're trying to learn a lot of the time. So it isn't just content services. It's how do you do agile delivery? How do I implement DevOps? How do I do design thinking? Right? All of these kind of things. We do a lot of that, as well as and trying to help them understand how that cultural shift, which is at the end of it, it's something really core to an organisation and takes time. So we do that, as well as the kind of technology, building up skills in new platforms, and whether it's CRM or whatever.
Yeah, big part of your business, Russell.
So we're definitely doing it same as everybody else. And if you look at, we've recently been awarded a piece of work with Maserati, which has been in the press, around being their experience agency of record. We're back to this sort of experiential piece across the whole gamut, as opposed to just a creative spot that's a single one-dimensional campaign that might run, or it could run over a period. But I think organisations now are recognising that they need to move towards connecting together the brand experience itself into something physical. So it actually touches all of the different parts of the organisation. It's not just a bunch of values and promises that are made at one end that manifest themselves in a pithy advert or a great strapline. Actually, it's something that actually connects all of those touch points together, whether it's engaging on a website or touching a vehicle or talking to someone in a call centre or a delivery. That's the brand value, not just the thing at the end. And that's what we're trying to build for clients, is how do you connect those pieces all together to add ultimately a better experience.
I mean, arguably, this is the job that clients used to do themselves.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. I'm going to talk about acquisitions, because it's great having you here, John. We'd love to hear about your experience, and also I'd love to hear the pitch and the proposition when you were first approached by Accenture.
I think we sort of approached them. I can't really quite remember. But I mean, it wasn't like a conventional sort of, I think we we felt that the most interesting work we were doing was with the Deloittes and the IBMs. We actually hadn't really worked with Accenture, but working on new propositions end to end and sort of plugging into this new ecosystem. And we could see that there was a lot of change, and it was the most enterprising and interesting work we were doing as an agency. And, we're quite digitally focused anyway, so we've got like 300 people, 150 of them work in technology, so it felt quite natural to sort of lean into this marketplace. And then it's just happenstance, isn't it? It's who you know. So we ended up spending a bit of time with Accenture, and as Russell's touched on, I guess what we felt was that creativity was in danger of becoming quite a downstream, commoditised, channel-based service. Maybe rightly or wrongly, we're not the best creatives in the world, but we believed that our strategic and creative chops could sit further up the food chain. We didn't like being treated as a sort of supplier by clients. We genuinely did want to be as a sort of top table partner. So that was what was intriguing from us. And then, as I say, the experience to date has been, interesting. It's been predominantly positive. They're a huge organisation. People always say to me, "What are Accenture like?" That's like asking, "Well, what are French people like?" It's
What are French people?
well, they're good and bad. No, I mean, but no, it's too big an organisation to sort of say, well, they're very entrepreneurial, they're very client-centric, more client-centric than agencies. Mm-hmm. They don't do anything that doesn't benefit their client, which is interesting given some of the debates around agencies being slightly self-serving. They really, really move at speed. For big companies, they move so much faster than agencies. They move into every new space rapidly. It's a roller coaster. There's a lot of opportunities. I mean, I was talking to some of my creative agency brethren, and I think our current, working process with Accenture in terms of number of clients is bigger than the entire new business pipeline in London. I'm not joking, so it's ridiculously vast in terms of scope and quantity. But I mean, overall, it's been a good outcome. And what we knew we didn't want to do, and this is not having a dig, we didn't want to go down the traditional holding company route because we could see, I'm not here to damn them, but we could see that model wasn't really working for any of our mates who were in that environment. Right. So, you're kind of looking at alternatives, and this felt like an interesting journey.
So I hope you don't mind me reading out a couple of quotes from the alternative that you've chosen.
Yeah, please.
So Brian Whipple is on record saying it's Accenture's mission to never grow their acquisitions as a standalone entity, and that brand identities are kept only for transition purposes. Yeah. Does that mean the Karma Armour brand is going to disappear?
Well, our view on it, well, at the moment, it's got conjoint branding, which, to be honest, I think every creative agency that's ever sold in history has ended up in some sort of conjoint branded structure. So ours says Karma Armour, Accenture Interactive. I mean, what we've said, again with humility, because we're not an arrogant agency, is that, when Accenture has the best employee brand in creative culture, and when Accenture is the desirable partner for every CMO in the world, we'll consider it. What I mean by that, but what I mean, you don't buy a company to destroy it, and Accenture are very, very smart people. So the final bit sounded like I was being arrogant. I didn't mean that, but what I mean is you don't destroy value. So the market's changing so quickly. Who knows who's going to be the number one creative company in 5 years' time? It could be IBM, it might be Ernst & Young, it could be Deloitte. I don't know. Who knows who's going to be the number
PwC.
one? Or PwC, or anybody else I've forgotten. But, the truth of it is I don't know how the market's going to restructure, but, we're not value destructive. And the number one thing is staff and reputation and being able to hire. So at the moment, Karma Armour's a great brand for that. So I can't see anybody messing in with it for the foreseeable future.
Good. This is, though, a really interesting subject around acquisition and what happens to the cultures, because clearly there is a slight disconnect between the culture of an ad agency and a consultancy. I'm interested in all of the acquisitions that all of your holding companies have made. Colin, would you be happy to talk about some of the acquisitions that have happened and how you've seen those cultural differences play out?
Yeah, I mean, we started acquisitions probably 5-6 years ago. We learnt a lot during that period. I mean, one of the main focuses for us, the reason we've never carved out a PwC Digital and we drive everything into the core of our business is you've got to get the business strategists and the management consultants and the creatives and the experience designers and the technologists working simultaneously together seamlessly. That's really, really hard. And it takes a long time to build a culture of trust and respect and everything else required. And that's been our focus for ever since we started this journey. 100% of our focus has been, how do we get that right? Which means, honestly, we've been slower relative to our competitors because we've not gone big acquisitions. And part of the reason is because every company that you acquire comes with its own culture, an own identity that you have to respect. So when you're trying to build a new culture, not one that's agency, not one that's your existing consulting model, but one that is the best of both worlds, that's freaking hard. And as a consequence, we've married strategic acquisitions alongside team grabs. In fact, acqui-hires, as we call them, is a huge focus for us because you want the camaraderie and bond that comes with a team, but you want them to earnestly work at building that culture between the kind of what we call the B, the X and the T, the business, the experience and the technology. And that has been for us a key part of how we've gone about it. From a brand perspective, and I make no opinion about it, but PwC has a very strict brand architecture, and ultimately all of our acquisitions move to PwC. In fact, the only acquisition we've ever done that hasn't was Booz & Co, where we created a new brand, Strategy and. You can comment on the brand if you like, but it is what it is. That's the only sub-brand that we've got. It will be the only sub-brand that we have, and I have, as I hope most people would, respect for. We have a brand architecture. We stick rigidly to it.
Mm-hmm. Debbie, I know IBM iX has been pretty acquisitive in the digital specialist arena. How have you found the cultural fit there?
Well, as Colin was talking about, there is challenges of bringing together two cultures that are potentially different, but at the end of the day, finding that secret sauce that brings the best of the both together is worth the investment in doing, right? And you want to respect all of the reasons that you bought that company in the first place. You want to keep that whole, and you want to elevate it, and then you want to take some of the best bits and integrate it with your best bits and make a new best bit, right? So if they're red and we're blue, and who doesn't like purple, right? So that's what you're trying to do is find that. But it's not, it takes effort and energy and a real passion for making it happen. And I'm delighted to say that on all sides in the acquisitions we've had that. We've been lucky with that. So.
Great. Russell, I know that Accenture have probably been the most acquisitive of all of the groups at doing this. I think there was a time when it was sort of one a month for 12 months.
Yeah.
Have you seen specific challenges coming from some of those acquisitions?
I think the answer is no, because I think Accenture's got the smartest acquisition strategy that I've seen. You can't build a culture, you grow a culture, and you can't smash cultures together because you just end up with conflict. So you've got to actually grow them together over time. And I've worked in Omnicom, and I've watched Omnicom destroy companies by buying them and trying to squash them into a holding company. And I've worked in Sapient, and I watched Sapient do the same. They try to squash them together and make them work, and they just don't. What Accenture do really well is a really light touch. So they'll acquire a new company, and then they deliberately say to everybody, you cannot go steaming in there. You have to accept and recognise that they're a separate organisation and a separate culture, and they look to then push business into those organisations to foster the value. You don't buy something to destroy it, you buy something to try and leverage it and grow it. So rather than trying to absorb it into the organisation, they have a very hands-off, light-touch approach, and then look to push work into it to actually grow that business out and take the benefit out of actually what they know. They've been acquired because they've got something of value. And so, it's a very different approach. So our CEO talks about cultures within cultures and recognising that different organisations bring different values in the same way that a culture in the UK is very different to a culture in France. The culture in the core of Accenture is very different to the culture within Camarama, and you have to respect that because they were acquired to add value to the organisation as a whole.
I mean, the only thing I'd add I agree with that. I mean, the only thing I'd add to that is, where we come together and where everything drops is around clients. So, the most exciting thing, which I think we've all talked about in different ways, is the new mix of skills needed to help companies grow. And what I would say certainly about Accenture, but I believe it's true of all the consultants, with their complete client centricity. I think I'm right in saying mostly they're structured around one P&L. Certainly we've only got one P&L, so there's no silos. So the only thing that matters is the client. So when you go onto a client team and you're working on a business challenge, it's really, really fun. It's a really different experience. In terms of Karmarama, and for those of you who know us or anybody who's been in there, our culture hasn't changed at all. In fact, if anything, it's got better. And I mean that very sincerely. I mean, against our metrics and benchmarking, we take that Sunday Times Best Companies thing incredibly seriously. And I think last year we were number 50, this year we're number 21. And that's, an anonymous staff measure of whether they enjoy working there. And it's still a really fun place to work. So nobody's coming in messing with the culture, but where we do collaborate, and what I find intellectually interesting is around a client problem. And then, all bets are off. You could be from anywhere. You're just bringing your skill set to the table to help round out a really interesting discussion around growth.
Right.
So it's different.
Well, we're leading on to, I think, for me, the most fascinating area, which is around talent. So you'll excuse me for doing this, but we've done some very crude calculations via LinkedIn, and we've worked out the number of people from the ad industry that have actually moved to consultancies. And it's quite surprising, actually. So about 2,500 people that we can track at the moment have moved from one to the other globally, and about 250 in the UK. And I suppose I'll start with you, Russell, to ask you, what sort of talent are you looking for when it comes to your hiring policy?
It's people who are collaborative, because you've got to be able to operate in a really odd, vague, ambiguous environment. So you've got to be able to roll your sleeves up and work with different people and different parts of the organisation. You've got to be good at problem solving. So again, problem solving for me and actually creative are the same thing. So whether you've come from a creative organisation, a creative industry, the idea of a creative proposition that you're trying to solve is you're trying to look at it from a different angle and bring new levels of thinking. So it's the ability to sit down, not just with a creative team, but with someone who's a data scientist and someone who's a user experience architect, someone who's a coder, someone who's used to using SAP, people who use things like Watson, and then put all those skills together and then come up with a new idea, a totally different way of solving the problem. So it's collaboration and different ways of thinking around problems are the key ones.
Debbie?
Well, I would build on that in terms of creativity in an IBM context means something more than perhaps it does in a traditional kind of agency model, right? I mean, creativity it's kind of not so much of a job title. It's everything, every IBMer, whether you're in IBM iX or in the more traditional parts of IBM, it's core to our being, right? We do 22 patents a day, I think, last year, right? So in terms of how we start to try and think differently, to solve problems, to get products or ideas out and to help our clients grow, it's part of everything that we do. And so that's ultimately what we're looking for, people who can think creatively and differently. And diversity is a massive agenda for all of us. From Ginny down, and she would talk about, and I would echo it completely, diversity is about inclusion, and it's about, and you've got it on the back of the T-shirts, right? Great minds think unalike. I love it. Steal that, use that, pretend it's mine. So, it is about finding all of those different ways of thinking, the ways of, to your point, solving problems, the ways of working together that bring a whole mix of skills that enable us to really tackle those challenges that we don't even know are coming yet. That's
right.
what I would add to that.
Colin, have you been hiring from the agency world?
Yeah, we have just hired our ECD in London from an agency that I can't disclose yet because she has just resigned, but we'll announce it in the next month or so.
Is Gideon here? He's going to be on the lookout. Gossip is.
Our Experience Centre leader in the UK was the President and Chief Strategy Officer of Future Brand. We obviously hire creative designers and UX, but actually more importantly, we focus a lot on anthropologists, ethnographic research, people who understand how to get people to co-create. It's very easy to put people in a room and say, let's co-create. Actually understanding how to move people to do that is really important for us. Combined with a whole load of other talent. On the diversity point, I could not agree more. We have a very strong message that we push internally, which is everything has to be about diversity of thought. How do you have diversity of thought into everything that we do? So we have a requirement, because for a while we've had at a graduate level strong diversity targets, and that's working, but it's not moving fast enough at the senior level. So we have a requirement, certainly in the UK, that I can talk to. It has to be 50% male-female, it has to be 25% BAME, there is no excuse. And forcing headhunters to do that actually starts to move the needle. Nowhere near fast enough, but it starts to move the needle. And if we don't do that with experienced hires, we will never solve that problem. So it's a huge agenda for us, but the functional roles, I think, I don't think it's new news. I think everyone would be looking for the same.
I mean, I'm pleased we talked about diversity, actually, because there have been some fantastic talks this week on the subjects, and I'm pleased to be able to put a word in for Lighthouse Company. So we don't need to be asked by our clients to do that, because it's something which is built into our process already.
Just add one thing on that. Only one thing, which is, the holding companies have quite rightly said, the cultures between creative and left and right brain will never work, and blah, 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 and they're all too different. And, that's, to me, a bit of a cheap shot, because, what we found is we've never had so many incoming calls, interests, CVs. There's no word of a lie in terms of our ability to hire. More people are interested in what we're doing than probably I sense than a lot of the other things that are going on in the market. And I'm not saying that to plug it. I'm saying if it's that evil and that culture is so bad, why are so many people emailing, grabbing you in the corridor? Can I buy you a beer, mate? What's going on over there? Yeah. So I think it's a genuine alternative for creative minds, and it's grown up and it's interesting, and you attach yourself to real business problems. It's everything a great creative problem solver should want to be involved in, I think.
Yeah. Russell, perhaps could you just describe what it feels like to be part of Accenture versus your previous experiences, having worked for most of the agency holding groups?
It's a lot more serious, for one. Because you're dealing with often the budgets are a lot bigger and the problems are a lot meatier that you're having to solve. But you're also dealing with very, very, very smart people, very senior people who've come out of different organisations. I remember my very first day at Accenture. I sat in a room with 30 people, my peers. For 8 hours, we were talking about client opportunities, and we were talking about things like foreign exchange impacts on project values. You never have those conversations in creative agencies. And out of the people, all the people in the room, these were ex-CIOs, CEOs, CFOs, managing directors. These were senior people with big contacts and big Rolodexes. And so the conversations elevated a lot more to serious business problems that you're ultimately trying to solve. And that's one of the things that ultimately brought me over to Accenture, is dealing with much larger, complex issues of a bigger scale and trying to solve those problems.
Yeah. Good. Okay, we've just got a couple of minutes left. I'm curious to know, and I'll start with you, Debbie, if you suddenly got a job, and it could be through the Lighthouse Company, to head up one of the large...
miss an opportunity, will you?
To head up one of the large advertising agency networks, what would you do?
Do you know, I feel blessed that I feel like I have the best job in the world right now, right? I am sitting...
You have just got a new job. Obviously.
I have just got a new job.
Yep.
I'm fortunate enough to be able to lead the IX organisation across the UK and Ireland now, and I've got 500 amazing people that we're going to grow, and we're going to solve massive problems for our clients and help them go to the next level. We've got all sorts of new clients, and you talked about Benjamin Braun, and we've just started working, as I think I mentioned to you, with Audi. So that whole world of what's there's so much change coming, and I'm quite happy where I am. Thanks very much.
Colin,
turn down.
You get the big gig. So Martin's moving aside for you.
Well, given the diversity comment. So I think, let me answer it a different way. I think that it has taken all consultancies decades to build up the depth of industry expertise that they have, that understands how industries move, where the bottom line drops, etc. I think that that's a very difficult thing to compete on, because trying to replicate that unless you've got very big acquisition pockets is very hard. However, what professional services, the question I would ask is, where are professional services going to? Where professional services going to are, how do they become asset-based businesses as well as people-based businesses? What is the ad industry answer to that? What is the assets that the ad industry, not necessarily on their own, but in alliances with others, can create? Because I think that's where it's moving. Along with, I would be absolutely on the phone 100 times a day trying to build as many alliances as possible, because I think that the route of trying to do it all yourself is not what client wants anymore.
Great, thank you. We are out of time. I'm just going to sum up by firstly thanking all of you, but also to say it's quite interesting that all of you talked about customer experience. So there is no question that is the space that everyone needs to be in at the moment. I get that the boxes are slightly blurred, but clearly understanding the language of growth. And I think there's no doubt there are challenges around integration, but I think if everyone wants to send their CV to John Wilkins, because it's clear they have the secret sauce over at Karmarama. Thank you very much to Russell, Debbie, Colin and John. Thank you.